Every town has its secrets, but Blackthorn's secret is a nightmare. For decades, the old manor at the edge of the woods stood abandoned, its walls whispering of something unnatural. Those who dared venture inside never returned the same, if they returned at all. It was Halloween night when four friends, Emma, Jake, Mia, and Sam, decided to explore Blackthorn Manor. They sought thrills, a tale for the night, but they would leave with more than a story. The manor stood before them, looming and eerie. Its windows were dark, and the wind howled through the trees, sending dead leaves tumbling across the overgrown lawn. The house had stood empty for years, and yet it looked as if it was waiting for them. Emma stood at the front gate, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Are we really doing this? This place feels wrong." Jake smirked, brushing past her. "It's just an old house. What could possibly happen?" Sam and Mia hesitated for a moment before following him, a nervous laugh escaping Mia's lips. "Let's just get this over with." With a collective breath, they pushed open the rusted gate and made their way toward the front door. The house seemed to groan under the weight of time, the old wood creaking as if alive. As they reached the door, the wind picked up, and the sound of it howling through the trees grew louder. The moment Emma touched the doorknob, a chill ran through her spine, but she ignored it and opened the door. It swung wide with an eerie creak. The musty air hit them like a wall. The hallway was lined with old portraits, their faces faded with age, their eyes watching them as they stepped inside. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath their feet, and the smell of mildew and decay filled the air. "This is definitely creepy," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe we should leave," Jake laughed. "It's just an old house. Come on, let's look around." They spread out, each heading down different hallways. As Emma wandered deeper into the house, she found herself in a dimly lit room. The air in here was cold, too cold. She walked further inside, her flashlight scanning the room. She noticed a broken mirror on the floor, its shards scattered like glass daggers. Her reflection was blurry at first, but as she bent closer, something caught her eye. In the reflection, she saw someone standing behind her, a shadowy figure, pale and still. She spun around, but there was nothing there, only the empty, decaying walls. Her heart raced. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but she felt a deep, unnerving presence behind her. Her skin prickled as if something or someone was watching her. She quickly turned away, her mind racing. Meanwhile, Jake had found something. He had stumbled across an old, tattered diary that had been discarded on the floor in what looked like an old study. His hands shook as he flipped through the pages, each one filled with erratic scribbles and unsettling messages. He read aloud to the group, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't stay after midnight. It's coming. It's already here." Mia let out a small laugh, trying to sound braver than she felt. Probably just some crazy person who lived here. Nothing to worry about. But Sam wasn't so sure. He looked around, uneasy. The air seemed to grow heavier by the second, and a low growl echoed from deep within the house. It was so faint, almost like it was coming from the walls themselves. "Did anyone else hear that?" Sam asked, his voice trembling. "I heard it," Emma replied, her voice sharp with fear. "We should go. Now." They started to move back toward the front door, but as they did, the house seemed to shift. The floorboards creaked louder, and the air grew colder still. The whispers began, faint at first, then growing louder and clearer. "Mia!" It was her name, a soft, raspy whisper that seemed to come from all around her. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Did you hear that?" Before anyone could answer, the house groaned. The door slammed shut. The windows rattled as if an invisible force was pressing against them, trapping them inside. The floor beneath them trembled, and then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps, moving across the floor above them. Jake looked up toward the ceiling. "It's just the house settling. Let's get out of here." But then the footsteps came closer, closer, and the house no longer seemed like a forgotten relic. It felt alive, as if something was awake, something hungry. Sam turned to face the others, panic in his eyes. "Something's wrong. We need to get out now." Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed from down the hall. It was Jake. The sound of his voice sent chills down their spines. They ran toward him, their flashlights shaking as they tried to find him.
They rounded a corner, and there, standing at the end of the hallway, was a figure, a woman. Her face was pale, her eyes empty and black, her mouth stretched unnaturally wide. The light flickered as she slowly raised one trembling hand and pointed directly at them. Then, in a voice that wasn't quite human, she whispered one word, "Run." Without a second thought, they turned and bolted for the front door, their hearts pounding in their chests. But no matter how fast they ran, the house seemed to stretch, the walls closing in around them, trapping them in its grasp. The sound of their frantic footsteps echoed in the narrow hallways, but no matter which way they turned, there was no escape. Every door they tried was locked, every window they reached was sealed shut. The creature was close. They could feel it, hear it, its sharp, scraping breaths as it drew nearer. "Please, let us out!" Emma screamed, pounding on the door. "Let us out!" But the door wouldn't budge. It refused to open. And then they heard Jake's scream. He was on the floor, his body trembling violently, his eyes wide and vacant. Something had touched him. Something had taken part of him, something that couldn't be explained. His breath came in ragged gasps, but his body was already starting to change. His skin turning a sickly pallor, his hands twitching unnaturally. The creature's cries echoed through the halls like something both human and inhuman, desperate and feral. They finally broke through the door and tumbled onto the lawn, gasping for air, their limbs shaking with fear. But when they turned to check on Jake, he was gone. His flashlight remained, flickering weakly in the cold grass, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The wind picked up again, but this time there was something else. A low whisper, faint, unmistakable. "You'll be back." The ground beneath them seemed to shift, the manor watching, waiting. The house was still hungry, and it had marked them all. Blackthorn Manor stood silent against the night sky, its windows glowing faintly. The front door creaked open as if beckoning the next soul to step inside. If you ever hear your name whispered in the dark, don't answer.